You know those movie trailers that just completely trick you? Like the studio cuts together this massive montage of explosions and, high-speed
Oh,
chases.
yeah, with the really heavy rock track playing underneath the whole thing.
Exactly. And they sell you this fast-paced action-adventure blockbuster, but then you actually sit down in the theater, the lights dim, and within like 20 minutes, you realize you're watching a deeply intense, really uncomfortable psychological drama.
Right, it's a total bait and switch. You walk in expecting this simple, entertaining ride, and the director delivers a complex character study.
Yeah, and the explosions were just background noise for a much heavier narrative.
They just focused on the spectacle to get you in the door.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today, we're taking that exact bait and switch dynamic and applying it to a story from our sources that almost everyone thinks they know.
Oh, this is a good one.
Right. We're diving into a detailed source lecture that completely deconstructs the biblical story of Jonah. And our mission today is to, well, peel back the layers of that highly sanitized, Sunday school version of the narrative.
Because if you just walk down the street and ask literally anyone about Jonah, there's really only one thing they ever mention.
Always the whale. Or, well, the giant fish.
Yeah, it's the inescapable focal point of the popular imagination.
Exactly. The guy gets swallowed by a sea creature, hangs out in there for 3 days, gets spat out on a beach, and goes on his way. It's framed as this neat, somewhat bizarre survival story.
Right, like an ancient man versus nature epic.
But our source material makes a highly compelling argument here. The fish is, it's barely a footnote. It's the action movie trailer trying to sell a psychological drama.
It really is.
Because the real story is actually a gritty, unvarnished look at tribalism, the nature of mercy, and honestly, the dark depths of human prejudice.
What's fascinating here is that the fish only gets a handful of verses in the entire text. I mean, it comes and goes in a flash.
Wow, really? Just a few verses.
Yeah, barely a blip. The actual narrative thread, the central tension that runs relentlessly from the very beginning of the source material all the way to the end, isn't a sea monster at all.
Okay, so what is it?
It's Jonah's deep, seething, almost irrational anger
Yeah.
that is the actual engine of the story.
Huh. And to really understand that anger, the source points out that we can't start out in the ocean. Like, we have to start on dry land.
Right, specifically by looking at the destination Jonah was so desperately trying to avoid.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Context is absolutely crucial here.
It is. We have to understand who Jonah was before he was ever given this mission. Because he wasn't some, inexperienced rookie.
Right.
He wasn't a false prophet struggling to figure out his calling either. According to the historical chronicles detailed in Second Kings, which is this ancient text detailing the history of the Israelite monarchy, Jonah was actually a highly respected, established prophet in Israel.
Oh, wow. So he was like legit.
Very legit. The things he prophesied historically came to pass. He was trusted by the political establishment, and he intimately knew the voice of God.
Okay, let's unpack this. He gets this clear command to go to Nineveh, which the source says is roughly 1,000 kilometers away.
Yeah, a massive journey.
And his reaction isn't just a polite refusal. I mean, he practically sprints in the exact opposite direction.
He literally books a ticket on the first boat going the other way.
Right. He heads for a place called Tarshish, which is roughly 4,000 kilometers away. The analogy the source uses is just
The
striking.
New Zealand one, right?
Yeah, it's like being told you need to travel from Cape Ranga at the very top of New Zealand down to Wellington, and your response is to immediately jump on a plane and flee into the middle of the Australian outback.
The sheer scale of the geographical avoidance is just staggering.
It really is. So why was he so desperate to get away?
Well, the geography highlights the desperation. But to understand the why, you have to look at what Nineveh represented. It was located near the modern-day border of northern Iran and Iraq. Okay. And during this historical period, it was the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire.
And from what the source says, the Assyrians weren't just difficult neighbors.
Not at all. They were the terror of the ancient Near East. Nineveh was a massive, intimidating cosmopolitan fortress.
Like, how big are we talking?
It had a population of 120,000 people, which, for the ancient world, is a staggering density.
Wow, yeah, that's huge.
And when you approach the gates of this city, you are greeted by these colossal, imposing towers shaped like half-man, half-beast figures.
No, terrifying.
Exactly. The architecture itself was weaponized. It was literally designed to make any foreign visitor feel like a speck of dust, just projecting dominance and instilling a profound sense of dread.
And their reputation completely matched the architecture. Our source notes they were Israel's most brutal enemies.
Brutal is almost an understatement.
Right. They engaged in calculated systemic violence. They would physically hang the bodies or the decapitated heads of their conquered victims right on the city walls for everyone to see.
Yeah, it wasn't just violence for the sake of violence. It was highly organized psychological warfare.
Just to send a message?
Precisely. They meticulously documented their own cruelty in their state records and stone reliefs specifically to paralyze surrounding nations with fear.
So we have a respected prophet, a guy who fully grasps the political and military reality of his era. And he's being asked to walk into the capital of a bloodthirsty enemy empire, completely unarmed, to deliver a prophetic critique.
A suicide mission, essentially.
Right. So isn't running away just a basic, understandable survival instinct? I mean, wasn't he just terrified of becoming a permanent wall decoration in Nineveh?
See, on the surface, that is the most logical assumption. I mean, any rational person would run from an empire that uses human remains as urban decor.
I know I would.
Right. But the text reveals a stunning plot twist regarding his actual motives.
Oh.
Jonah wasn't running because he was afraid of dying. He was running because he was afraid of succeeding.
Wait, what? But if Jonah knew God was omnipresent, which, was central to Israelite theology, how did he think running across the Mediterranean to Tarshish would actually work?
That is such a good question. Did he think God's jurisdiction just magically ended at the borders of Israel?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that points directly to how his tribalism had corrupted his theology. In the ancient Near East, deities were highly localized. The Assyrians had their gods, the Babylonians had theirs, and their power was tied to their specific geography.
Ah, okay.
Jonah intellectually knew his God was the creator of the whole earth, but his actions suggest he had subconsciously shrunk God down to a localized tribal deity.
So he hoped that by leaving the physical land of Israel, he could just, step outside of God's active jurisdiction.
Exactly. He thought he could just avoid the assignment entirely.
And the reason he wanted to avoid that assignment is honestly the real gut punch of the source material. He wasn't avoiding failure. He was avoiding the very real possibility of a successful mission.
Precisely. And the text actually has Jonah confess his true motive later on. He says to God, quote, "I knew you were a gracious God, merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, relenting from disaster."
Wow. So he knew exactly who he was dealing with.
He knew the core character of God perfectly. He ran because he understood that if he went to Nineveh and preached, and the Assyrians actually listened and repented, God's nature would compel him to forgive them.
And Jonah actively, desperately wanted his oppressors to be obliterated.
Absolutely. He wanted fire and brimstone to rain down on the people who had terrorized his nation. He did not want them saved.
It was a furious rejection of mercy for the other.
Yes, he viewed divine justice and mercy as this zero-sum game.
Huh.
If Assyria receives mercy, Israel loses.
But, as we know from the story, the geographical avoidance strategy completely fails.
Spectacularly.
Right. The storm hits, the whole fish incident occurs, and Jonah is essentially deposited back on track, first to carry out the mission.
And when he finally arrives in Nineveh, he gives what has to be the most unenthusiastic, bare minimum prophetic performance in recorded history.
It is so bad. He delivers the absolute shortest sermon conceivable. According to the source, in the original Hebrew, it's just 5 words long.
5 words.
Yeah, he essentially walks into this massive metropolis and mutters, 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. And that's it.
No grand rhetoric.
Nope. No persuasive arguments about morality. He offers them absolutely zero instructions on how to repent or how to fix their society. He just drops a doom-laden sentence and leaves.
He does the absolute bare minimum to fulfill the technical requirement of his mission, clearly hoping it won't be enough to actually change anything.
But then the unthinkable occurs.
Right, the most violent, arrogant city on earth actually listens to this 5-word sermon.
It's wild. From the king at the pinnacle of the social hierarchy all the way down to the ordinary citizens. I mean, the text even includes their livestock in the mourning.
Yes, even the cows are wearing sackcloth.
Exactly. The entire city repents. They fast, they mourn, and more importantly, the text notes they actually turn from their institutional violence.
And because of this sweeping social change, the destruction of the city is delayed for about 150 years. Nineveh doesn't ultimately fall until 612 BC.
So the violence ceases, generations are spared. You would think a prophet who just single-handedly triggered an unprecedented social and spiritual transformation in an enemy empire would be, I don't know, thrilled.
He should feel entirely vindicated.
But instead, Jonah's reaction is profound, bitter resentment. He marches outside the city walls, sits down in the dirt, and is just seething with anger that God actually spared them.
He is fundamentally offended by the extension of grace.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the underlying psychology of this reaction is incredibly relatable, even if our daily stakes are quite different.
Oh, for sure.
The source uses this great analogy. Imagine you have this bitter rival at work or in school, someone who has constantly undermined you, taken credit for your work, and just made your life miserable.
We all know someone like that.
Right, and you find out they're failing spectacularly and they're about to get fired or expelled. You're quietly celebrating because you feel justice is finally being served.
Literally.
But then management or the principal forces you to be the one to mentor or tutor them.
Oh, that's the worst.
It is. So you do a terrible job on purpose, giving them the bare minimum advice. But somehow it clicks. They turn everything around, they get a massive promotion or full scholarship, and they are totally secure.
And your reaction isn't joy for their growth.
Not at all. Your reaction is to storm into the boss's office, outraged that they passed, you wanted them gone, and you resent being the instrument of their success.
That analogy perfectly captures the psychological mechanism at play here. Jonah is enraged that the grace he naturally assumes is his birthright is being offered to a group he despises.
Yeah, he just can't handle it.
And this dynamic forces us to examine the sociological implications. Why was Jonah so fundamentally offended by God showing mercy to an enemy?
Right. Why?
The source argues that Jonah had deeply misunderstood the original foundational purpose of his own people's relationship with God.
Okay, how so?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the biblical timeline highlighted in the source, we start to see the true tragedy of Jonah's mindset. If you rewind to the book of Genesis chapter 11, you have the story of Babel.
Right, the tower.
Humanity rebels, they try to build an empire of their own making, and they're scattered across the earth into various nations and language groups. But immediately after that fracture, in Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abraham.
And gives him a promise.
Yes, and the specific promise made to Abraham is, through you, all families of the earth will be blessed.
All families, that's a huge distinction.
The text emphasizes all.
Uh,
The original intention was never that Israel would be a cul-de-sac of divine favor, just hoarding blessings instead of the surrounding nations. The intention was always that they would be a conduit.
They were supposed to pass it on.
Exactly. They were supposed to demonstrate a way of living that would draw the surrounding nations, the Gentiles, meaning anyone outside the ethnic lineage of Israel, back into a restored relationship with the divine.
But Jonah had basically succumbed to a severe form of religious nationalism.
Deeply so. He was comfortable with God blessing people who shared his heritage and his geopolitical interests, but he absolutely recoiled at the idea of God reaching across enemy lines.
It's a fascinating literary pivot, honestly, because most ancient Near Eastern texts like the Assyrian annals or the Babylonian epics, they're just pure state propaganda.
Oh yeah, entirely.
They exist to glorify the king, justify the empire's conquests, and portray their enemies as inherently evil and deserving of destruction. Their heroes are always flawless.
But here,
Right. Here we have an ancient Israelite text where the Israelite prophet is portrayed as the stubborn, prejudiced villain, and the brutal enemy empire is portrayed as capable of profound humility and repentance. It's the stunning self-critique of their own culture.
it is incredibly rare for an ancient culture to preserve a narrative that so aggressively dismantles its own exceptionalism. The text is actively holding a mirror up to its audience, challenging their rigid categories of us versus them.
So true.
And because Jonah is so deeply entrenched in these categories, God uses two massive structural object lessons to force him to confront his own hypocrisy.
One in the sea and one on the land.
Precisely. Let's look at the sea one first.
Yeah, let's dive into the sea lesson because it's much more complex than a simple rescue mission.
It is. When Jonah is swallowed by the fish, he offers a poetic prayer from its belly in chapter 2. But if you analyze the literary structure of that prayer, he isn't describing the biology of a marine animal.
Right. He's not talking about fish guts.
No, he describes a descent into death. He explicitly mentions going down to Sheol, which was the ancient Near Eastern concept of the underworld, this shadowy place of the dead located beneath the foundations of the earth.
He describes seaweed wrapping around his head, sinking to the roots of the mountains, and the earth closing its bars behind him forever.
He's articulating the absolute dissolution of his identity and his autonomy. He has hit the ultimate rock bottom.
And this descent, the source points out, is a vital structural mechanism in biblical literature. Like, you see this archetype everywhere.
Oh, it's everywhere. Joseph is thrown into a literal pit by his brothers and descends into an Egyptian prison before he's raised up to save the known world from famine.
Right. And David.
David is driven into the wilderness, living in caves as an outlaw before ascending to the throne. The entire nation of Israel goes into the cultural death of the Babylonian exile before experiencing restoration.
So the mechanism is clear. You must descend into the depths of your own failure, surrender your autonomy, and experience a kind of death before you can be resurrected to bring actual restoration to others.
Which perfectly explains why, several centuries later, the writers of the New Testament specifically use the Jonah archetype to explain Jesus.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It isn't just a surface-level comparison about being buried for 3 days. It's about the mechanism of descent and restoration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus refers to the sign of Jonah. But as the text unfolds, you realize Jesus is meant to be read as the precise inverse of Jonah.
Oh, so?
Where Jonah runs away from his mission to the nations out of prejudice, Jesus actively embraces a mission that includes reaching out to the marginalized and the Gentiles.
The contrasting imagery is brilliant there. Jonah sits outside the city walls of Nineveh, observing the city from a distance, just angry that its people are experiencing salvation.
Yes.
Jesus, on the other hand, stands outside the city walls of Jerusalem and openly weeps over it, mourning the peace they rejected. It's a complete inversion of the prophet's posture toward humanity.
Jonah illustrates the destructive endpoint of a heart that has lost its compassion, while the later texts present Jesus as the embodiment of what that compassion should actually look like in practice.
Right. But returning to our narrative, God isn't quite finished deconstructing Jonah's worldview yet.
Not at all.
We arrive at the second object lesson, the one on the land, which exposes his internal priorities with surgical precision.
The story of the plant.
Yes, the plant. This is such a fascinating, almost absurd detail. So Jonah is sitting out in the desert sun, building himself a little shelter, just stewing in his own rage.
He's essentially waiting to see if God will change his mind and destroy Nineveh after all.
Exactly. And the heat is oppressive. So God causes this broad-leafed plant to quickly grow over Jonah to provide him with shade, and Jonah is thrilled. It's literally the only time in the entire narrative where he exhibits joy.
His joy is entirely tied to his personal comfort.
Completely. But then, at dawn the very next day, God sends a worm to attack the root of the plant. The plant withers and dies, a scorching east wind blows in, and the sun beats down on Jonah's head again.
And Jonah loses it.
He really does. He displays a profound, bitter resentment over this dead plant, stating that his anger is so intense he wishes he were dead.
And that is the moment God springs the trap. God highlights the staggering cognitive dissonance of Jonah's worldview.
It's a brutal reality check.
It is. Jonah is heartbroken, furious, and defensive over the loss of a simple plant. A plant he didn't cultivate, he didn't water, he didn't create. And that existed for a mere 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yet he is outraged that God possesses a deep, abiding concern for 120,000 human beings. People who, as the text poignantly notes, do not know their right hand from their left.
It's a devastating exposure of misplaced priorities. The source uses this incredible modern analogy.
The homeowner one.
Yeah, it's like a homeowner who attends a city council meeting, absolutely furious and screaming because a new zoning law might allow a building that slightly obstructs their view of the hills.
Right.
Meanwhile, they step right over people suffering through a massive homelessness crisis on the sidewalk just outside the building, completely indifferent to their survival.
That's a powerful image.
The homeowner's minor, temporary comfort is fiercely defended, while the actual lives of their neighbors are entirely discarded. It just distills his tribalism down to its essence.
If an event benefits his immediate comfort, it holds ultimate value. If an event benefits his perceived enemies, it's a cosmic injustice.
Which really brings us all home for us, because it raises an important question, perhaps the most critical question of this entire deep dive.
It really does.
It's incredibly easy for us to sit here analyzing an ancient text and just judge Jonah. We can view him as this archaic, stubborn hypocrite.
Right. Point the finger at the ancient guy.
But the source refuses to let the audience remain comfortable observers. It challenges you, the listener, with a deeply uncomfortable shift in perspective. It demands that you identify. Who is your Nineveh?
This raises an important question indeed. The narrative functions as a mirror. Who are the specific individuals or demographics that you struggle to imagine receiving mercy.
Who are the people that make you feel a quiet sense of injustice when you think about them succeeding or finding peace or avoiding the consequences you feel they deserve?
Is it a group that holds entirely different political ideologies or social values than you do?
Or maybe a specific person who betrayed or hurt you years ago, and you are still carefully guarding that bitterness.
Are there populations you find infinitely easier to analyze, criticize, and mock than to genuinely advocate for?
It's the people we've quietly written off. The ones we label as beyond redemption, or the ones we secretly hope don't get a second chance because, well, it threatens our own sense of moral superiority.
And this is where the literary brilliance of the source material truly shines. Unlike a standard ancient hero's journey, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Enuma Elish, where conflicts are ultimately resolved and the hero's arc is completed, the Book of Jonah refuses to give you closure.
Yeah, the balance sheet is never balanced.
There is no tidy final chapter where Jonah falls to his knees, admits his selfishness, and embraces the Ninevites as brothers.
No, the story ends with a jarring, abrupt halt. God asked Jonah that final piercing question, should I not pity Nineveh, that great city? And then, silence.
The text just terminates.
Yeah.
We're given absolutely no historical record of Jonah's response.
Did he repent? Did he walk back to Israel a changed, humbled man? Or did he just sit in the dust, clinging to his anger and his shadeless resentment until the day he died?